Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Sophia Chan Combrink. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce here in Hong Kong, a nonprofit, non-governmental organization founded in 1977. Welcome to the Unspeakable Series, conversation about diversity, equality, and inclusion. Episode 2, we'll be talking about LGBTIQIA and plus communities, inequalities, and unspoken truths. Before we get to today's seminar, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Chamber for those who are unfamiliar. We have over 2,000 members representing nearly 300 companies, making us one of the most more active international chambers here in Hong Kong, and certainly one of the largest Canadian business organizations outside of Canada. Again, for those of you who are new to the Chamber, what do we do exactly? So we deliver 4 services to our members. Number 1 is business promotion, networking, brand exposure, learning and training, information and insight, and representation and advocacy engagement. So today we are having Pride Month in Hong Kong in June and around the world. We're very honored to have 4 esteemed panelists representing the LGBTIQIA plus communities and sharing with us their stories from a personal level, workplace perspective, and their communities at large. So without further ado, I will now pass this on to Tina Arcilla, Senior Manager, DE&I APAC at Manulife, who is also our moderator today to kickstart the webinar. Tina, over to you. We look forward to the seminar.
Likewise. Thank you, Sophia, and good day to all. As mentioned, I'm the moderator today. I'm Tina Arcilla from Manulife. My pronouns are she and her, and it's my pleasure to be here today. As you all know, this is episode 2 of the Unspeakable series, where we attempt to have a deeper conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues that we might avoid or not even realize that we need to have. And we're not having this conversation to be controversial or to be quote unquote woke. We do this to acknowledge and better understand the different facets of what it means to be human. As we near the end of June and all of the colorful Pride events peter out, we thought it would be good to tackle something that might be overlooked. Hence this episode on LGBTQIA plus communities, focusing on the inequalities and unspoken truths. So let me first start with 2 premises. The first being that the LGBTQIA plus community encompasses several communities that each encounter their own challenges. Some may have more visibility, support, and representation, even in mainstream conversations, while others remain marginalized and not understood even within the LGBTQIA plus community. And so beyond the first 2 letters, the L and the G, we're talking about transgender, intersex, bisexual, queer, and other communities. Add to that the lens of culture, ethnicity, skin color, then the added layer of socioeconomic class. Then we see that there are minority groups within an already marginalized community that do not get recognized or heard. And so this leads me to my second premise, which is that we need to recognize the limitations of our own attempts at allyship. And this leads to the question, which is, how inclusive really are our attempts at inclusion? Now, before we go into the panel discussion, I wanted to remind us all that being LGBTQIA+ is nothing new in this part of the world or any part of the world. It may have been suppressed, but there are actually rich histories and traditions across the region. And of course, an evolving language and culture, depending on where you are in Asia or the world. And to those of us who may not be in the know, we might think, oh, this is all brand new, what's happening? There's some new terminology popping up every week. Sure, perhaps the terminology is evolving, but I see it more as really a reflection of how much more we're understanding about identity and sexual orientation, some of which we forgot we already knew this before. I'd like to share an example. A recent idea that I've come across is the definition of bisexual as, well, we used to say it's someone who is attracted to both men and women. And what I came across, it said, is saying that this bisexual person is somebody who's sexually attracted not exclusively to people of one particular gender. It's a very slight difference, which you might not pick up if you're not looking for it. But I think this reflects the understanding that gender is not binary. So something that I've been reflecting on the past few weeks. And there's so much more to learn. I'm still learning, we all are. And so I invite you to keep that sense of curiosity and openness with you. This is a safe space, and I know that gets thrown out a lot, but I invite you to keep this space safe. Make sure that the questions that you send in are done in the spirit of curiosity and openness, and done in a respectful way. You may send your questions in via the chat. If you're a bit shy, you can find my name there, and I'll read it anonymously so that you can get your thoughts and your questions out into this discussion, because I would like this to be a discussion. So please do send in your questions, your thoughts, and your comments in the chat box. So I am moderating an amazing panel. I'm very excited to be here. Let me go one by one in alphabetical order. First off, she is the president of Queer Straight Alliance, or QSA, which is this amazing network of LGBTQI students, staff, and allies across campuses in Hong Kong. Please welcome Jody Chan. Hi, Jody.
Hi, thank you, Tina. So hi, everyone. I'm Jody, and my pronouns are she, her, or she, they. I really don't mind. And I identify as lesbian or queer. And yes, I'm also the co-president of QSA, Queer Straight Alliance, and we are basically a student organization that welcomes students from all universities in Hong Kong, and no matter whether they're gay or straight. And I'll briefly introduce our work here for those who don't know. And our work is mainly divided into 3 branches. So first, it's the social and advocacy and career. So for social events, we mainly organize gatherings like parties or poetry sharing or game nights, mainly just to create a safe space for everybody and to meet, other LGBTQ people or friendly allies, and to find their community, basically. And for advocacy events, we participate in the Hong Kong Pride Parade and IDAHOT events every year. And we also try to reach out to students through social media or publications or holding booths in university campuses. And of course, last but not least, we have career events, because we know that, as university students, it's important for us to help them progress into their professional lives as an LGBTQ individual. And we have our signature mentorship program that we organize together with Fruits and Suits, which is a professional network for the local LGBTQ community that is working. And we also pair up mentors and mentees according to their industries and interests. So and every year they will discuss anything from, being LGBTQ and also workplace or just anything in life in general. And I'll briefly introduce maybe my journey in discovering my own identity as well in this introduction.
Maybe we can do a quick round first before we go into that. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh yeah, sure.
Maybe we can bring on the next speaker. So he is the Diversity and Inclusion Manager for Asia at the global law firm Mayer Brown. He is actually a former colleague of mine. Really delighted to have you with us, Michael Chan. Michael?
Hi, thank you, Tina, and thanks for having me. So again, my name is Michael Chan. I'm currently the DE&I manager for Asia for Mayer Brown. So I oversee the regional DE&I matters for the firm in Asia, which we started officially in 2018 with the establishment of a DE&I committee and 3 DE&I networks, which cover currently 6 streams of diversity related efforts. And I could sort of introduce what my role entails, because this is also something that people might be curious about, because like what is a law firm, like a D&I manager in law firm does. So some of the main elements are like internal focus, like reviewing policies, overseeing the employee resource groups, and organize D&I events and programs. But we also have external facing part that includes working with clients on programs and activities and different D&I matters. And with that, I am going to stop here, and I will like introduce myself more in the conversation.
Thanks, Michael. Lastly, we have the founder of the Gamut Project, which focuses on building community and curating resources for queer and trans people of color. They're actually also a talented artist whose work I very much admire. Please welcome Vincy Chan. Vincy?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Tina, and thank you, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, for having me today. My name is Vincy. I use he and they pronouns. I am non-binary, trans, and queer. And as Tina said, I run a very small collective called the Gamma Project, supporting trans and non-binary people of color here in Hong Kong. And I guess we'll talk more about my work and what I do later on in the conversation.
Thanks, Vincy. Well, I guess on to the more personal side of things, which Jody started earlier. I guess one bit of guidance is maybe let's anchor it around as well. What is it about you that is hard for people to understand when you introduce yourself? So for example, for me, I am a straight ally, and I've been working in this space for over 10 years. And when I first started, people would ask why. They would assume I'm lesbian, because what is your stake in this? And I think we all should have a personal stake in working to have a more inclusive society. It was influenced by the people around me who were both straight allies and people in the community, and it just made sense to me. And not a lot of people back then understood it, but I think more and more people are beginning to understand that this is something that we all should be a part of. But that's me. Jody, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tina. And thank you for being a great ally, because a lot of people call themselves ally, but they're not actually active allies and who actually do a lot of work for the LGBTQ community. So thank you very much for all the work that you have done. And back to my personal story, I would focus more on, my probably non-binary identity, because actually I've come into terms with my lesbian identity many years ago. I kind of just realized it and just accepted it. There wasn't a lot of struggle, but it was only last year after I've joined QSA where I was in touch with more knowledge about the different areas of the LGBTQ plus, and that I have started really reflecting on my own gender identity, really. And I have kind of recalled some memories that I didn't even realize, like how when I was smaller, I wasn't really gender conforming, and some kind of dysphoria that I kind of felt when I was smaller about my own body. And I realized that, I've never really been the girliest girl, but I also don't really identify as a man either. And right now I'm just more comfortable with being having the different facets of gender in general, and just being comfortable in my femininity and masculinity. But in general, I would still say that I would identify myself as a woman because I think it's just easier for me in a society to have a certain label and a more gender conforming. I wouldn't say that I'm conforming, but a more typical gender. And if you have never heard of gender capitalism, which I believe is a term coined by Ray and Dove, it is basically to understand that there are advantages of being a certain gender in certain situations. And I think it's a really good way for me to use the fluidity of my gender. For example, I would speak in a lower register which makes me sound more masculine as I'm presenting, because in psychology, that makes me sound more trustworthy. And sometimes when I go to clubs or bars, I would dress more femininely because, being a feminine girl gives me more benefits. And I think the most important thing is I'm comfortable in what I am, and I'm just, comfortable in playing around with gender and all the kind of gender expressions that come along with it. So that's my journey.
Thanks, Jody. I can really resonate with what you shared, especially with the voice. So for example, my natural voice tends to be quite high. I sing as a soprano, but I came across the same thing back in school, where the idea was if you do public speaking, in sort of certain situations, I would tend to pitch my voice lower because that was seen as more professional. Definitely can resonate with that. Thanks for sharing. Michael, how about you?
Sure. So as a cisgender gay man, I use he, him pronouns. And I think as we are probably the most sort of represented or most outspoken group, and I think people sort of and getting into the DNI space, actually I want to sort of amplify, using my voice to amplify other voices who are underrepresented, because I know that as Jody mentioned, like there's certain sort of capital that we gain with our gender, with like even for sexual orientation, because as a gay man, we like people perceive us as like, okay, so you sort of like represent this group, right? But actually we're not. So we are actually sort of just one part of the community. But then as Tina, you mentioned earlier in the introduction, like even within the community, people don't really understand other groups. And I'm also learning, I'm also trying to educate myself about like people in other groups, what are the struggles, what are the challenges. So that is also something that got me interested in the DNI space, and like using my role in the corporate world to sort of influence people's mindset and to have a better understanding of what it means to be part of the LGBT plus community. So yeah.
Thanks, Michael. And Vincy, how about you?
I think what Jody and Tina said about the voice really resonated with me as someone who identifies as transmasculine and also sings. I think that there is a lot of preconceptions that people associate with certain genders. So for me, for example, like Jody said, I came out to my friends as non-binary after I graduated from college, and definitely looking back, there are a lot of instances in my childhood or adolescence that I felt like, those moments could have easily been described as having a dysphoric moment, but at the time I just didn't have the words for it. And also I think I struggled quite a bit after I first came out and after I came back to Hong Kong. That was back in I think 2016, and there weren't as many resources for non-binary folks in Hong Kong, and I was pretty much the only non-binary person that I know. So I'm very glad to have to see that the trans movement or the trans community in general has bloomed over the past couple of years. I think the one thing that people may struggle to understand about non-binary folks, whether people who have a more masculine or feminine leaning or none at all, is that there is so much to what a gender identity or gender identities could encompass. And I've recently started using he, him pronouns as well. And one of the things that I worry, or one of the things that kind of a brick wall that I've come across, is because I am someone who hasn't undergone any medical procedure, and I feel like sometimes it is I guess difficult for people to see me as legitimate a legitimately, a trans person, because I think there's a lot of people even, within the trans community where they're like, oh, you're only trans, or you're only trans enough if you've undergone certain procedures. And I really want people to know that isn't true. And I think that that is the beauty of being able to explore our gender identities and our expressions, because there really is so much to it, and there's so many ways to be, to live in our own skin and our own gender.
Thanks, Vinci. And that's a point that I think has stuck with me, is the idea of being enough. So, are you considered trans if you don't do X, Y, Z? And so there's this idea of what is acceptable, what is enough to be able to call yourself a certain label, which a lot of people fall into that sort of mindset, whether you're part of the community or not, of, well, what are you? Tell me, because I need to know. Which I think, it's good to have a thirst for understanding, but at the same time, I think there could be better ways of trying to understand, rather than, having this sort of aggressive Q&A with the person and asking them to almost justify their existence. What I'm really excited about this discussion is that you're from the community, you're out and proud about it, and you're also doing work with the community in the education space, in the wider community, in the workplace. And so this discussion is about the misconceptions that we have around inclusion. And so from your different point of views, what challenges are you most concerned about that you've seen being perpetuated in the discussions, in the strategies of organizations? And how are you trying to sort these out in the different work that you're doing with QSA, Gamut Project, and Mayor Brown? Maybe we can start with QSA from the more education space with young people.
Yeah, sure. I think the challenge that I'm most concerned about is probably the support from school, because take HKU as an example. So right now they do have the Equals Opportunities Unit do have policies against discrimination on sexual orientation, but they do not have a policy for discrimination against gender identities. So that kind of puts trans people in a pretty vulnerable position, because one of my trans friends who experienced bullying or discrimination, they don't really have an outlet to solve the situation. And I also have a friend who's also trans, who went to a social worker because LGBTQ community are more prone to mental illnesses statistically because of the added pressure from the society, and also especially for trans folks. And the suicidal rate is also higher for this community, and it's important for them to have the suitable social support, and for them to talk to somebody, and for to get the right resources to deal with these problems. But one of my trans friends who went to a social worker, they were unable to, the social worker wasn't really able to help with the situation. So I think it's really important for school counselors or social workers to understand how to deal with LGBTQ students, and also point to them if they are not able to help them immediately, to point them towards the right resources. And I think right now, QSA, our mentorship program, is trying to fill in this gap for the social support that they are not able to get at school. That is, we pair them with a mentor, and they can talk about anything ranging from being an LGBTQ individual and being LGBTQ in a workplace, or just in life in general. And I would like to share a very heartwarming story that we had from one of our mentees. So the mentee came out to their mom as trans. And the mom was really worried about how they're going to be treated at work, in their jobs, or just in the society in general as a trans individual, because it's always hard to be trans in such a gender stereotypical community or society. And their mom actually saw them talking to a man through Zoom pretty frequently at night. And the mom asked, "Hey, who are you talking to?" And the mentee said, "Look, Mom, I'm talking to a mentor, and he's showing me how I can get help and how to navigate through in this industry, being a trans and LGBTQ individual." And the mom was like, "Wow, this is really amazing that somebody out there is looking out for you." And I think that kind of takes away some of the worries that the mother may have for the trans kid, or a trans young person who may be pretty uncertain about what they may encounter in the future by this pretty cruel society, I would say. And yeah, so not just about how to be an LGBTQ individual in society, we also our mentors also provide a lot of resources and directions as to how to be LGBTQ in workplace. So one of the very simple things is, how to look for LGBTQ friendly organizations. You can go on Glassdoor or check the company website and check whether they have protection, good policies that protect LGBTQ individuals. And also one of the initiatives, career initiatives that we do is the Inclusion Recruitment Conference, which is basically like a job fair with large organizations that are LGBTQ friendly. So in this job fair, students will talk to other people who work in these organizations, and it'll introduce the LGBTQ culture to them, so they know that which organizations that they may be interested in that are LGBTQ friendly. And that's one of the things that we hope to help with the current difficulties that students may face as an LGBTQ individual.
I like how you got very specific about trained counselors, the need for resources, mentors, and that sort of segue into workplace and choosing your place of employment, which hopefully we're seeing more and more companies that are actually being real allies and having policies that protect all of their employees. You mentioned resources. I know Vinci Gamut Project is all about collating these resources, relevant resources for and by people in the community. Care to share about these misconceptions and also your concerns and what you're trying to do in terms of improving inclusion?
I think the scope of my work sort of has changed over the years as we get in touch with people in the community that are younger. And I think a lot of times, very similar to what Jody mentioned, they don't feel supported by their school or by their parents. And that goes for a lot of small things like not being able to wear the school uniform of their choosing, not being able to access medical health care in the public system under the age of 18 by themselves. And again, the lack of legislation around it, or, the fear of being outed by sometimes by, the school counselor or social workers to their parents. All of this is very real. And I think, for us, it's mostly right now, trying to offer support, emotional support to these people. And for me, I think creating lasting change is a mix of both structural and interpersonal changes. I think, maybe Michael could talk a little bit more about, the structural changes, but I think for me, as a trans person, the very concrete things that I would like to see change, for example, in the company that hires me, is stuff like having a gender neutral bathroom, or people being aware in general of trans issues. Hopefully my gender affirming healthcare being supported by insurance, and things like that. And all of those are very practical things. But I think the other side to it is also having an environment of people that are supportive, but also, they are self-reflective. They're constantly learning, and they're committed to that learning. And I see this question in the chat box asking if there's transphobia within the LGBTQIA plus community. Absolutely, I could say that for sure. And like Michael said, that there are definitely, I think, some segments of the community that aren't as invested or aren't as interested in learning about the more marginalized members of this larger rainbow umbrella, like trans folks or intersex folks, migrant domestic workers, refugee asylum seekers. I feel like all of that, the solidarity with people whose identities might not be the same as yours is very important. And those are the things that I'd really hope to see changed. And to be very honest, like as someone who's just turned 30 and like are still being able to be in touch with people sometimes in their early 20s or sometimes in their teens, I'm really happy to see that people are a lot more curious and educated, and of course there are a lot more resources on the internet about different gender identities or sexual orientations, or just other marginalized identities in general. And we're seeing things like very slowly change. So I'm happy that I get to witness that in my lifetime.
Thanks, Vinci. Absolutely agree about the need for structural change. I think that, yes, we need to work on culture and people. That's how we make these changes. But at the same time, there are all of these embedded biases and barriers that we need to really sort out. So on to Michael. So Vinci kind of went into, what are companies doing? So yeah, what are you doing within Mayor Brown and perhaps in the wider business community in Hong Kong? I know you're pretty connected there.
Sure. So I mean, like what I'm going to share is something that the experience that I got when I was working together with Tina at community business, some of the good practice that we have seen in like corporates and also at Mayor Brown. So you have touched on it perfectly, Vinci, that beyond cultural changes, there's also like the infrastructure that needs to happen in order to allow LGBT plus folks to feel safe and comfortable. So some of the like legal recognition or legal protection is still not happening in Hong Kong. Like for example, these are challenges, for example, and like public opinion, I would say, is improving. So for example, in the 2020 research conducted by COHK, they found that 60% of the respondents very much agreed that there should be legal protection for discrimination of people of different sexual orientation in Hong Kong. So I think that's one good step in terms of like changes in public attitude. And there's particularly in like 18 to 34 age range, there's 80% of people who agree that there should be legal protection for sexual minorities, which I think it speaks to the optimistic side of how things are progressing in terms of public opinion. And sometimes it's almost like leading with the infrastructure, like the policies is almost like lagging. And I think this is where corporates, particularly international MNCs, sort of step in terms of, for example, at Mayor Brown, we provide medical insurance coverage for both married same-sex couples and domestic people who enter domestic partnerships, as long as they have some like documentation or to sort of show that they are in the domestic partnership. Also, I know like Manulife recently like rolled out a insurance coverage for HIV positive patients, and I think that is a great step ahead in sort of protecting LGBT plus folks. Yeah, so Vinci, you mentioned gender affirming surgery support, gender neutral bathroom. These are some of the good practices that a lot of MNCs are doing. But obviously, there are also a caveat, that is a lot of these companies, they might be like take gender neutral bathroom as an example. Some of the companies are in buildings that are quite old, and they don't have an executive bathroom to like strip down and turn it into gender neutral bathroom. So the intention is there to provide a more inclusive environment and provide infrastructure, but there's also this side of this side of the coin that we need to sort of consider as we try to push things forward in Hong Kong. So yeah.
Thanks, Michael. And thanks for the shout out. Yes, we recently announced that we are extending life insurance coverage to people who are HIV positive. We've expanded the beneficiary definitions to reflect the evolution of what a family is in today's day and age. Of course, same-sex married partners can purchase life insurance policies for each other. And internally, yes, we do support gender affirmation surgery for our employees. So for us, this is like, of course, we do this. And we're now actually asking, what else are we missing? Because even just to get to this stage, it's taken a while. Not necessarily internally, because, and you referenced this, Michael, so we may want to have gender neutral toilets, but then sometimes the restriction is the facilities, the building itself. Or you then, in the insurance industry, you might have to think about underwriting, because there's a whole lot of negotiation to be done there in the wider community, no matter how much we want to have, bigger change. And so it's definitely something that we need to be talking about and involving more and more people, widening and the ecosystem, developing that to make sure that it's not just within the walls of the workplace, within the walls of the university. What we're really working towards, the reality is we're working towards a more inclusive society. And that takes a lot of effort from different parts of the community. And so my next question is really around, what are we missing? What are the pieces that need to be filled in, or the gaps that need to be filled in? I know for sure the laws and other protections are lacking, but from any of you, from all of you, what do you think we need to be working on? The easy wins and maybe the harder battles that need to be fought. Anyone?
I could start. So I see that Sophia's asked a question about how to better support your non-binary child, and one of the statistics that I wanted to bring into the conversation is again, another recent study that was done by CUHK is that over half of the trans community that had been surveyed here in Hong Kong felt that they had been discriminated against either in the school or the workplace, or when they are being provided services. So you could see that it really is a widespread issue, I think, across the different life stages that all different trans people are in. And I think speaking from the perspective of someone now who is an adult, I think that going back in time, if I had come out earlier, one of the things that I really wish had happened for me is to have more, I think, adult figures in my life who are supportive of my decision, whether or not it's my teachers or my parents, my doctors. And I think one of the things really, especially when you're you're talking to someone who's still maybe exploring their gender identity, is just to affirm that, maybe they change pronouns on a day-to-day basis, or that, when other people refer to your child as a son or a daughter, it's your place to step in and be like, oh, actually, it's just my child, it's maybe there are other kind of not gender terms to describe a certain person. And I think that, every step of the way, like in school or in university, at the workplace, there are all these small things that people around trans people, like trans allies, could do to make the environment more supportive. Because I do think that, like, while it's great that a lot of the companies have policies in place or protocols in place to maybe hire a more diverse workforce, but it's already a struggle, I think, for a lot of trans people to get their foot in the door into these workplaces. Like, trans people are 3 times more likely to be unemployed in Hong Kong compared to the general population. So you see that it's not, just a matter of getting these people certain places. It's really, having support every step of the way.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you say. And yeah, like what Tina said, there are obviously really big things, like just, simple, a law against sexual discrimination, against sexual minorities. That would be really helpful. But there are also a lot of, the things that LGBTQ people face the most often is just daily, probably microaggressions, like what Vinci has mentioned, misgendering, or just how to be a better supporter or a parent is to simply listen to your child and to affirm what they say and not just dismiss it. Because I have mentioned, for example, my girlfriend to my friends, and my friends would proceed to talk about what kind of guys I like. And that is the kind of dismissing that we don't want to see. And so how to be affirming is the next time, for example, when you hear similar things, or when you see your friend write your friend who you think is a girl write Mr. in front of their names, you don't just look at it and say, haha, how funny is it, but to acknowledge it, and I think it is all based on the fact that, sexuality is treated a lot of time as a joke or a taboo. For example, in school, people would make jokes like, oh, that's so gay. And people would have to just, play along with it. Or even me and myself as a sexual minority would have to just play along with it, or else maybe I would out myself, or I would cause a scene. And of course, it's best to stand up against it. But just these very simple microaggressions will cause LGBTQ individuals a lot of discomfort most of the time. And another thing that I was really disappointed at is last week I saw on a TVB show where a cross-dresser who is also a sexual minority depicted as a serial killer in one of their shows. And these kind of plots have appeared again and again multiple times, where transgender people or sexual minorities are depicted as psychopaths or threatening to other people. And imagine for all the audience that are watching, and I imagine it will be an older population, and how they will think about transgender people and sexual minorities if they keep on watching these kind of scenes. And I believe a lot of people have already complained about these kind of scenes, but it seems to have no progression. And the same thing for sexuality being seen as a joke, or being seen as comedy in TV shows on local TV. I think just starting from these points, I think is already really important.
Thanks, Vinci, Jody. Michael, anything to add?
No, I think Vinci and Jody, you've basically covered a whole lot of what I was trying to say. One thing that I want to add is I think there's also part of we need to sort of get more straight ally into the conversation, and not just having us sort of almost like speaking in some people might think as speaking in an echo chamber, because I think like I've heard like some of my straight friends were saying like, I do support LGBT plus initiatives, but tell me where to start. I think like so some of them might have this sort of questions about that, and in order to get more allies, it's a two-way street, and we need to in order to get more allies, we need to sort of open up the space and let them participate. Obviously, like we will have our say in terms of like what should or shouldn't be done, but I think having straight allies in the conversation would be helpful in terms of progressing the narrative and the agenda.
Thank you all. There are some really interesting questions in the chat. What I'll do is I'll read them all out and see if we can just tackle them, in a smoother way rather than piecemeal. So there's a question around the disconnect between the more liberal public versus a more conservative government. So that idea of, oh, well, society is conservative, and so we cannot have the laws like this, but then the public actually being very vocal and saying, no, actually, we're changing in our point of view, or clamoring for protections for different minority groups. There's the idea of traditional family values or pulling the religious card. So there's that whole gamut of elements that are being brought up to kind of question, so for the government versus the general public. There's also a question on, let's bring in the corporates. What are your thoughts on pride events? How do they help? How can they be better? So let's maybe tackle those first. The idea of what the government says is of value to the community, which is family values or religion. Then you'll have members of the public who are speaking out for more inclusive behaviors and policies. And then you have corporate. Is what they're doing helpful? Is it misguided? What are your thoughts on basically wider Hong Kong society's approach to LGBT inclusion?
I'm going to answer the Pride event question. To be frank, I'm not a fan of Pride events or Pride months in general, because I feel like a lot of the times, especially for, and you see that a lot, I think, in MNCs or like retail services, they slap a rainbow logo like 30 years out of the day, and then, it's done for them, right? It's done and dusted. For me personally, what I want to see companies do more of, especially during Pride Month, especially if they're making money off of Pride-related merch, is to donate to grassroots organizations, because I feel like a lot of the times that money gets generated, and pink economy is a thing, right? Especially I think like for middle-class cis gays, there is a lot of spending power there, but I think Pride Month is actually a great time to raise awareness, or for people to notice who really are the people that are the most marginalized in the community, and how we could support them. And then that's, like I said, trans people, intersex people, migrant domestic workers, Black and brown people of color. How do we support these people that are in the community but don't get the visibility? They're not generating, quote unquote, economic value, or they just don't get the kind of representation that other segments of the community get. I think those are the questions that we should be asking during Pride Month, and honestly, every single day of the year. Like, there's Pride Month, there's like Black History Month. What are we doing around these times of the year? How are we committing ourselves to support the different segments of the community all year round? I think those are the questions that we should be focusing.
I think very valid questions, but somehow perhaps not asked as much. I mean, for me, one simple question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in Hong Kong, it seems to me there's a separate pride parade for the migrant domestic workers here. Doesn't make sense to me. Why not? Why are we segmenting this community because of their financial status or their job? I hope it's changed, but as far as I know, it's still 2 separate days. Doesn't make sense. And maybe, is that the unspeakable? Is there something unspeakable there that I'm not noticing? So yeah, if there's something that we can do is to question how we've, in quotes, celebrated Pride, and see what really is the impact we want to have besides celebrating. Are we asking the tough questions? Jody, Michael?
There you go.
Okay. I'm going to try to answer the family value / religion question. I think that's a very tough question, but I want to zoom up a little bit and take us back to down memory lane, and like when, like in 1991, it was being decriminalized, homosexual actions, and now and I've seen, like, for example, from CUNY Business research, first piece of research on LGBT plus attitude in the workplace, there's a significant amount of people who still thinks that LGBT plus is wrong. And I think that was back in 2010, if I remember correctly. And now in 2020, well, the research I just cited in 2020, they found that 60% of people who answer the questions, they agree that there should be protection for sexual minorities. So if we zoom out and look at the history holistically, we got hope, even though like at this moment we still see people sort of like saying homophobic stuff outright and without any shame and without any sort of filter. But like, even for example, citing my own my mom, like she was saying, like, how could they say stuff like that, right? Even for like the older generation, they see that as not appropriate already. So I think public opinion is shifting, even though it's not as quickly as we want to, but I think there is hope in Hong Kong to sort of these types of values is like dynamic, it changes. And so yeah, I think I think there is hope. It's just that at this moment it's not as quickly as we want it to be shifted. So yeah.
Yeah, and adding to, I really agree with what you say, Michael, and adding to what you said, I think you said 60% of the people are accepting or support the protection for sexual minorities. And I would also want to quote another piece of study done by Family Planning Association on youth sexuality, that 78% of the teenage girls are accepting towards homosexuality, but only slightly over half of the guys are accepting towards homosexuality. And honestly, that's quite a low number. And this is done in 2021. And I think things can definitely be improved through education, and to educate that, being LGBTQ is totally normal and typical. And honestly, it has nothing to do with religion. It is like, the current overturn of the Roe decision in the US as well. It is very practical problems, and it should not be a religious problem, and people have to understand that. And I think it is through education and more knowledge that we should learn this. And I think, which also brings me to another problem, that is the current lack of Chinese resources for local people on LGBTQ knowledge, and there are plenty of English resources out there, but for the local community, it's hard for them to get access to these kind of knowledge because there aren't a lot of Chinese publications or outlets for them to look for these knowledge. This is also why I've been insistent in, making our Instagram posts in bilingual content if they're not purely English events. But I still think there's a lot more to be done in this regard.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Jody. And I think, translation is the bare minimum, right? If you want to reach folks and support them, we cannot exclusively just put it on one platform and in a single language. So thank you for all of your sharing. We are running low on time. So I guess my final question to all of you would be just very quickly, what is your advice? What piece of advice would you give to individuals or organizations who want to challenge their preconceptions about inclusion and the LGBTQIA+ community? So let's keep it rapid fire, maybe less than a minute, 30 seconds if you can. Why don't we start with you, Jody?
Yeah, sure. I think for individuals, I think definitely check out whether your organization has a LGBTQ network, or if no, then probably start one in your organization, because I believe a strong community is it's a good start to general acceptance in a larger society. And if your organization does not have a professional network, I would definitely recommend Fruits and Suits, which is the local LGBTQ professional network. And by the way, they have a gathering. They're resuming gathering after 1 or 2 years tonight, 7 p.m. in Petticoat Lane. And our mentees in the mentorship program will also join. So feel free to come.
Thanks for the invite, Jody. Michael?
Sure. I think from a workplace perspective, it does take it usually starts from the top, right? I think having the employee resource group, having a community of people to support this cause is great. But then if they're combining with the top from leadership to sort of showcase or openly support LGBT plus folks, and also role modeling behaviors, inclusive behaviors that can make employees, LGBT plus employees, feel safe and comfortable, I think that would be the way to go from a workplace perspective.
Thanks, Michael. And Vinci?
Yeah, I think you both talked a lot about kind of the macro side of things, or changing things from a structural level. But I think for me, my advice to someone who's just starting out is just to kind of examine the preconceptions that you have. So take the time to really educate yourself and read up on the different issues, I think beyond, gender and sexuality. And for someone who wants to start with the people around you, start with your mom, your younger siblings. I think, we've all heard people around us, people that we care about, say things that we don't agree with, or, things that we think are discriminatory or derogatory. I think, that is the time and the chance for you to step in and be like, hey, that isn't okay. And I really genuinely do believe that if every one of us could commit to that, just being a bystander and to intervene in situations like these, things will slowly move, I think, in the right direction.
Thank you. So what I got from that was the need for self-awareness and self-education, the need for leadership, and the need for building a community. Thank you so much for your time, Jody, Michael, and Vinci. With that, I hand us back over to Kanchan. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much. That was so insightful. And I hope that we can work towards a more inclusive and a more understanding world. So that it concludes our webinar for today. I'd like to thank Jody, Vinci, Michael, and Tina. Again, thank you. And of course, a big thank you to you all, the audience, for your participation. We hope that you found today's webinar very valuable, professionally and also personally. Before we end today's session, the Chamber and its community continues our theme of DE&I, and we are organizing a DE&I networking social, overcoming physical challenges, on July 14th at Cafe 8 near the pier. Please come join us. And we have an inspirational speaker, Ajmal Samuel. And there will be an opportunity to meet him and also get networking with others who are also in this journey together. So stay safe and take care of each other.